Global tributes held for hero Navalny as supporters denounce Russia, blame Putin for death and team accuse killers of covering tracks. Supporters of Alexei Navalny turn out around the world, including in Russia, to pay tribute to the man widely acknowledged as the Kremlin's main opposition figure. Navalny, a charismatic lawyer who rallied domestic opposition to Russian President Vladimir Putin, was found dead in his Arctic prison on Friday. He was 47. Supporters of Alexei Navalny have turned out across Europe and in the United States to pay tribute to the man widely acknowledged as Russia's main opposition figure, even when he was behind bars. From New York and Washington to cities in Western Europe to Russia and capitals of former Soviet bloc states, mourners showed their respect for the charismatic lawyer who rallied domestic opposition to Russian President Vladimir Putin, while Navalny's team said that he had been murdered. His death was announced on Friday by prison officials. His spokeswoman Kira Yarmysh confirmed on Saturday that he was dead and demanded that the Russian authorities hand his body to his family immediately. She said Navalny was murdered, but it was unclear where his body was. An official note handed to Navalny's mother Lyudmila stated that he died at 2:17 p.m. local time Friday. She added, saying a prison employee said Navalny's body was taken to the nearby town of Sulakard as part of a probe into his death. Navalny's lawyer, who arrived in Sulakard with Navalny's mother on Saturday, called a number for the morgue and was told that Alexei's body is not in the morgue, his team said on Telegram. It's obvious that the killers want to cover their tracks and are therefore not handing over Alexei's body, hiding it even from his mother, the team said. The prison service said on Friday that Navalny, 47, fell unconscious and died after a walk at the Polar Wolf Arctic Penal Colony about 1,900 kilometers, 1,200 miles, from Moscow, where he was serving a 3-decade sentence. The cause of death was still being established, said Russia's Federal Penitentiary Service. Ivan Zhdanov, the director of Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, wrote on X that Navalny's mother had been told by prison officials that her son had perished due to sudden death syndrome. Many around the world were quick to blame Navalny's death on Putin. Putin, murderer. Putin to The Hague, cried a crowd massed before Russia's imposing embassy in Berlin. The Hague is a Dutch city that hosts the International Criminal Court. Most of the several hundred people gathered in Berlin were Russian speakers, many holding up posters of members of the opposition or slogans criticizing Putin. It's a hard hit emotionally, said Evgeny Sirokhin, who coordinates the Free Navalny movement in Germany. It pushes us to continue to work, to struggle against Putin, added the 43-year-old, bearing a black and white photo of the opposition figure. Behind him, flowers, candles and photos of Navalny were laid on the pavement. In Warsaw, Poland, about 100 people demonstrated outside the Russian embassy. Most were young and visibly upset. One 29-year-old Russian who only wanted to be identified as Danilan said he saw Navalny as a symbol of Russian civil society. I am here because Russia should and can become a democratic country, he said. Candles and flowers were spread out in front of the gates of the well-guarded embassy. In Switzerland, around 300 people attended an impromptu gathering outside Zurich's railway station, while more than 100 gathered in front of the United Nations in Geneva, carrying portraits of Navalny and white flowers. In Moscow, small groups of Russians laid flowers at makeshift memorials. Images on social media showed dozens queuing to place flowers at monuments to victims of political repression in the cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg, with Russian police detaining dozens of people, the OVD Info rights group said on Saturday. As of February 17, more than 101 people have already been detained in 10 cities including 11 in Moscow, OVD Info said on its website. Vladimir Nikitin, 36, was alone laying a carnation at the capital city's Solovetsky Stone, which hails from the islands with the same name in the White Sea where one of the first Gulag forced labor camps was founded in 1923 by the Bolsheviks. Policemen looked on. When asked for an interview by Reuters, Nikitin asked to speak in the underpass which threads beneath Lubyanka Square, citing the fear of detention. Hopes had been smashed, Nikitin said. Navalny was a very serious man, a brave man, and now he is no longer with us. He spoke the truth, and that was very dangerous because some people didn't like the truth. The shock announcement of Navalny's death came the day before official campaigning starts in what critics say will be a stage-managed presidential election in March that will extend 71-year-old Putin's 2-decade hold on power. In the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius, crowds gathered at a memorial to victims of the Soviet occupation. Even in prison, he managed to find the force and give it to those who resist, said one Russian resident of Vilnius who did not want to give his name. In London, A few dozen people gathered outside the Russian embassy with signs in English and Russian saying "Putin assassin," "Navalny is our hero," and "Putin go to hell." Hundreds also gathered in the capitals of Armenia, France, Georgia, and the Netherlands. Across the ocean in New York, people laid flowers outside Russia's consulate and hung photos of Navalny on the gates. Several people held signs saying "Putin, killer." Several hundred people, some bearing posters and candles, also gathered in front of the Russian embassy in the U.S. capital, Washington, chanting "We are Navalny and shame on Putin." The words "Putin murderer" were projected on the embassy building. "I expected it, but it's still so painful that he left us so early," Miriam Henry, a 44-year-old teacher, said outside the embassy. "It's such a tragic day. He was a symbol of freedom, bravery and resistance," said a 29-year-old gymnastics coach who gave her name as Polina. Navalny barely survived a poisoning with the Soviet-designed nerve agent Novichok in 2020. Following treatment in Germany, he returned to Russia in 2021 and was immediately arrested and subsequently jailed. Navalny's death shows that the sentence in Russia now for opposition is not merely imprisonment, but death, said Nigel Gould Davis, a former British ambassador to Belarus and senior fellow for Russia and Eurasia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. The circumstances of Navalny's death are still largely unclear. The West, including US President Joe Biden, have blamed Putin for the death. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the reaction of Western leaders was unacceptable and absolutely rabid. Russian authorities viewed Navalny and his supporters as extremists with links to the CIA intelligence agency who are seeking to destabilize Russia. They outlawed his movement, forcing many of his followers to flee abroad. Navalny's supporters cast him as a Russian version of South Africa's Nelson Mandela, who would one day walk free to lead the country. His wife, Yulia, told the Munich Security Conference that Putin bore responsibility for her husband's death and that the world should come together to defeat the horrific regime in Moscow and reclaim Russia. Additional reporting by Associated Press, Reuters.